In a dimly lit room, Felicia woke up to find herself chained down to a stone altar. Her eyes started to adjust to the dim lighting of the room. Felicia tried to break free, but failed, for titanium restraints held down her ankles and wrists. She still struggled with the restraints so she could break free, but she wasn't strong enough. Zero walked in and saw Felicia trying her hardest to break free.
Don't wear yourself out. The restraints that hold you down are made out of titanium, my child.
Felicia looked at Zero, and a great fear came over her. Felicia couldn't speak, for she was paralyzed by fear. Zero slowly walked towards her.
You have been chosen to be a sacrifice to bring back my firstborn, named Pyron.
Felicia now feared for her life, just looking at him. Zero smiled at Felicia.
You'll be remembered as the one that brought Pyron back to life.
Zero ran his fingers through her hair.
Such a beautiful sacrifice. Pyron the Destroyer will be pleased. Now, all we have to do is wait until the key is discovered.
Zero kissed Felicia's forehead.
If we met before Pyron was defeated, I'd ask you to be my queen. But being a sacrifice is a greater honor than being the queen of all the Darkstalkers.
Just then, TJ walked in and bowed down.
Master, I found the key.
Zero turned to TJ.
How?
TJ replied,
By getting the information from Dimitri.
Zero answered,
Why would that self-centered vamp give you information on the key?
TJ laughed evilly.
Because the key was made into an uncontrollable Darkstalker named James. My brother.
Zero clenched his hand tightly.
A new Darkstalker? That can't be. I made sure that Darkstalkers couldn't produce offspring.
TJ looked up at his master.
James isn't an offspring. He was made into one by the succubus named Morrigan.
Zero was now enraged and blew up a wall that was 13 feet away from him.
Find the key, bring him back here, and kill Morrigan for bringing a human into the realm of Darkstalkers.
TJ got up and bowed again.
As you wish, my master.
Zero replied,
Remember this, TJ. Do whatever it takes to bring the key here, but don't kill him yet.
TJ started to walk out and looked back at his master.
Do not worry about me killing the key, master.
Zero turned back to Felicia as TJ disappeared into the night. Meanwhile, back at St. Paul's Hospital, where Jon was being held, Dr. Hansin checked Jon's condition. Dr. Hansin turned to Jane.
He has a clean bill of health. He can go whenever he's ready to go.
Jane replied.
Thank you, Doctor.
Dr. Hansin gave her the clearance papers. Jane took them and gave them to Jon. Dr. Hansin walked out of the room. Jon got out of his hospital bed in his hospital gown.
Can you toss me my pants, Jane?
Jane grabbed his pants and tossed them to him. Jon caught them.
Can you not look at me while I dress, Jane?
Jane turned around.
I won't look, Jon.
Jon put his pants on.
Okay, you can look.
Jane turned around.
Nice chest, Jon.
Jon walked towards her.
Thanks, Jane.
Jane smiled at Jon.
You're welcome.
Jon stopped.
Let's depart from this place.
Jane took his hand.
Okay.
Jon and Jane went to the main desk. Jon signed his release paper. Jon took Jane's hand again, and they walked out of the hospital, holding each other's hands. Meanwhile, halfway across the world in Washington, D.C., Pennsylvania, USA, Lieutenant Colonel James Grijalva was brought to JAG. James sat in the courtroom as the judge and 3 military officers came into the courtroom. As the judge took his seat, military policeman Winston spoke.
All rise. The Honorable Judge Omen is now presiding.
Everybody in the courtroom rose from their seats. Omen took a hold of his gavel.
Take your seats, and let's get this show on the road.
Everybody in the courtroom took their seats again. Judge Omen took the papers in front of him.
This case is U.S. Armed Forces versus Marine Lieutenant Colonel Grijalva James. He is charged with treason and false information on his record. Do you have anything to say in your defense, Lieutenant?
James looked at Judge Omen.
I'm not a betrayer of my country that I love and protect, Your Honor.
Judge Omen nodded his head.
Very well, Lieutenant. Does the prosecutor have anything to say?
Prosecutor William Boans stood up.
I do, Your Honor.
Judge Omen gestured to him.
Go ahead.
Prosecutor William straightened out his jacket.
Your Honor, for 4 years, Lieutenant Colonel Grijalva James has been leading his country into a false history and been spying for the Darkstalkers.
Judge Omen looked at James.
Is this true, Lieutenant?
James shook his head.
No, Your Honor.
Prosecutor William slammed his hands down on the table in front of him.
Your Honor, you're not really going to listen to him, are you? The facts are strong enough to dishonorably discharge him.
Judge Omen looked at the officer in the courtroom, then looked at Prosecutor William and James. Judge Omen grabbed the papers in front of him.
We'll have a short recess, and when I return, I will make my ruling. This court is in recess for 1 hour.
Judge Omen banged his gavel down, and the officers stood up and walked out of the courtroom. James sat there thinking and looking off into space. Prosecutor William gathered his papers and put them into his suitcase. Prosecutor William thought he had won, since there was so much evidence to prove that James was guilty. As 1 hour passed and the officers came back into the courtroom, Judge Omen took his seat and grabbed his gavel. He clashed his gavel down twice.
This court is back in session. After looking over the papers, evidence, and hearing the testimonies, the court has made a decision. Will the defendant please rise?
James stood up and waited for his judgment. Judge Omen looked at James.
The court finds the defendant not guilty of all charges. All charges on Lieutenant Colonel Grijalva James of the United States Marine Corps are grouped.
Judge Omen clashed his gavel 4 times.
This court is adjourned. The defendant is free to go under one condition. Lieutenant Colonel Grijalva must retire from the armed forces immediately. That is all.
Military policeman Winston walked to James.
Follow me, sir.
James turned to him.
All right.
Military policeman Winston walked James out of the courtroom. Prosecutor Williams stood up and left the courtroom in shock and defeat. Back in England, on 12th Avenue, Jon and Jane walked along the street. Jon, barefooted and shirtless, looked at Jane.
We need to get back to my hotel room so I can get into better clothing.
Jane replied.
All right, Jon.
Jon walked with Jane down the streets of England. Jane looked at him and smiled. She didn't care what little clothes he was wearing. She loved him no matter what. 5 hours later, Jon and Jane reached the hotel he was staying in. Jon took Jane up to his hotel room and unlocked his hotel room's door.
Make yourself at home while I dress, Jane.
Jane sat down in the kitchen.
Okay.
Jon walked to his closet and pulled out his suitcase. He put it on his bed and opened it. Jon pulled out a new pair of pants and a shirt. He put them on and threw his ripped pants into the closet. He pulled out clean socks and pulled his shoes out from underneath his bed. After putting his socks and shoes on, he walked into the kitchen. Jon opened the mini-fridge.
Do you want anything to drink before we leave, Jane?
Jane replied.
No thanks, I'm okay.
Jon closed the mini-fridge.
Let's go.
Jane stood up.
All right.
Jon walked to her and took her hand into his.
There's something you should know about me, Jane.
Jane looked at him.
What is it, Jon?
Jon replied.
I'm a Darkstalker.
Jane replied.
This can't be.
Jon let go of her hand.
If you want to leave, you can. I'll understand.
He turned away from her. Jane wrapped her arms around Jon.
I don't want to leave you. I've never felt so close to anyone but you, Jon. I don't care if you're a Darkstalker.
Jon put his hands on top of hers.
You don't know how much that makes me happy. That you decided to stay with me, Jane, even though I'm a Darkstalker.
A little tear of joy ran down his face. He'd never felt such deep feelings for someone in his life. Jane held him close to her.
I don't want to let you go, ever.
Jon closed his eyes.
You don't have to, Jane.
Jane and Jon stood there in the room until Jon unwrapped her arms. He turned around.
We must find Felicia. Then we can talk about going out.
Jane took his hands into her hands.
Then let's go find her.
Jon nodded his head and led her out of his room. He locked the door after it closed behind them. Jon took her back to the street where she found him bleeding. Jon sniffed the air.
Someone else was here with that man named TJ.
Jane was surprised by Jon.
Can you also tell the way they went?
Jon replied.
I have to change it to my werewolf form before I can tell you that.
Jon looked around, making sure that Jane was the only one that would see him change. Jon clenched his sides, and he changed into his werewolf form. Jon howled into the air and then looked at Jane. Jane covered her mouth, hiding her gasp. Jon looked in a nearby alleyway.
You can still leave if you want to, Jane.
Jane replied.
No, I'll go with you.
Jon sniffed the ground.
Then come. I found a strong scent.
Jane pushed aside her fear for his werewolf form and walked towards him. Jane took his paw into her hand.
Let's go, Jon.
Jon replied.
Just to let you know ahead of time, we have to run.
Jane answered.
Okay.
Jon smiled at her.
Hop on my back so we can find Felicia quickly.
Jane jumped onto Jon's back and was ready to go. Jon took off into the alleyway. He jumped onto a fire escape, then onto the top of the building. Jane closed her eyes and held herself close to Jon as he jumped from rooftop to rooftop. Jon sensed her fear of heights and chuckled. He continued to jump as the scent started to get stronger. He stopped on a warehouse.
You need to stay here, Jane.
Jane opened her eyes and jumped off of Jon's back. Jon walked towards the edge and was ready to jump. Jane stepped towards him.
Wait.
Jon looked at her.
What is it, Jane?
Jane replied.
I want to give you something.
Jon got back onto the roof and walked towards her.
Okay.
Jane kissed his muzzle when he was close.
Be careful and come back to me.
Jon smiled at her.
I will, Jane.
Jon turned around and ran to the edge and jumped off. Jane stood there on the roof. She slowly walked to the edge of the roof and looked down. She thought,
What a man. I never would have guessed that he was a Darkstalker. He's so strong and handsome, and he's all mine.
Jane sat down near the edge and waited for Jon to return with Felicia. She laid down and looked at the sky. As Jon landed and ran towards the piers, he realized the scent was only 2 feet away. He slowed down and sniffed the air, then closed in on warehouse A12. Jon sneaked into the warehouse, and the dim lighting blinded him for 2 seconds. Jon noticed that Felicia's scent was the only strong scent that he could smell. He quickly walked through the warehouse and found a staircase leading down under the warehouse. He quickly walked down the staircase. When Jon got to the bottom of the staircase, he saw Felicia on a stone altar. He noticed that she was chained down. He peeked into the altar room and on the other side of the room was Zero. 6 feet and 7 inches tall, with pitch black skin, long white hair, and a heavy-built body. He had more muscle mass than Dimitri. Jon had never seen anybody or anything with this much muscle mass. Jon clutched the wall and jumped into the altar room. Felicia looked up and saw Jon. Jon winked at her.
I'm here for you, Felicia.
Felicia started to get happy, and she wasn't worried anymore. Jon looked at Zero.
Hey, you in the corner.
Zero opened his eyes and turned around, and fear struck Jon when he saw Zero's eyes. Zero's eyes were death itself. They were pitch black and had death in them. Zero chuckled.
Ah, my son. Have you come to see the sacrifice?
Jon shook off the fear.
No, I'm here to save my friend.
Zero replied.
To fight me will mean death.
Jon answered.
I don't care. I'll fight you until I can't fight no more.
Zero's eyes glowed red.
Then let's fight, and let me see what you've got, my son.
Jon replied.
I'm not your son, so stop calling me that!
Zero chuckled.
I can't stop calling you my son, for I am the father of all Darkstalkers.
Zero got into his fight stance and charged at Jon. Zero closed in on Jon and threw a punch. Jon counterattacked Zero, but his attack had no effect on Zero's body. Zero kneed Jon in his stomach. Jon fell to the ground and coughed up blood. Zero looked down on him.
Don't make me kill you, my son. Join me and you will rule this world.
Jon replied.
Never. I'd rather die than join someone like you.
Zero answered.
Have it your way, my son.
Zero kicked Jon across the altar room. Jon picked himself off the ground and wiped away the blood from his mouth. Just then, Jon's dark energy started to build up in his body. Jon gathered all the dark energy and charged at Zero. Zero put his left hand up and fired a dark purple beam at Jon, but Jon dodged the attack. Jon closed in on Zero and did a roundhouse kick, which made Zero stumble backwards. When Zero regained his balance, he saw Jon's wolf missile coming right at him. The wolf missile hit Zero and put a giant hole in his chest. Zero fell to his knees and started to bleed black blood. He looked up at Jon.
You became so strong. I knew that you would win. Now, take your friend and get out of here.
Zero disappeared, leaving a pool of black blood. Jon walked towards Felicia and stumbled across the key to the chains. Jon unlocked her chain and helped her to her feet. Felicia hugged Jon and kissed his cheek. Tears of joy ran down her face.
Thank you, Jon.
Jon hugged Felicia back.
You're welcome, Felicia.
Felicia let go of him and noticed his blood was on her.
Jon, you're bleeding badly. Are you going to be okay?
Jon replied.
I'll be okay.
Jon walked towards the staircase, and Felicia followed him. Jon slowly walked towards the door of the warehouse. When Jon and Felicia reached the outside, Jon fell to his knees. Felicia ran to his aid.
You need to get to a hospital.
Jon replied.
Before we go to a hospital, you need to go get Jane.
Felicia answered.
Who's Jane?
Jon coughed up blood.
She's my girlfriend.
Jon pointed to a warehouse rooftop.
She's up there. Please, bring her down here, Felicia.
Felicia became a little jealous of Jane.
Okay.
Felicia ran towards the warehouse that Jon pointed to and climbed to its rooftop. Felicia quickly reached the rooftop and saw Jane. Felicia walked toward her.
Are you Jane?
Jane looked at Felicia and jumped to her feet.
Yes, and you are?
Felicia replied,
I'm Felicia. Jon sent me to get you. He's bleeding badly and we need to get him to the hospital.
Jane gasped.
Then let's hurry.
Felicia replied,
Quickly, take the fire escape. I'll meet you on the ground.
Felicia jumped off the rooftop as Jane took the fire escape. Felicia pointed towards Jon when Jane reached the ground. Jane ran to him and took his paw into her hand. Jane pulled him close to her.
Call 911, Felicia.
Felicia looked a little upset, but she found a payphone and dialed 911. The 911 operator picked up.
Emergency service. What is your emergency?
Felicia talked into the phone.
My friend Jon is injured badly and bleeding heavily. I need an ambulance down at the docks.
The operator said,
Okay, there's an ambulance on the way.
Felicia answered.
Thank you.
Felicia hung up the phone and turned around to see Jane tearing her sleeves off and wrapping them around Jon's injuries on his arms. Felicia started to get angry with Jane. Felicia still liked Jon, even though she liked James too. Felicia heard an ambulance in the distance and shook off her anger. She was willing to fight for Jon, but his girlfriend was a human. If she got into a fight with her, people would hate Darkstalkers even more. She just hid her anger until she and Jon were alone.